Damas y caballeros, ladies and gentlemen, I give you Dr. Alfredo Quinones Hinojosa.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Well, thank you very much. Please have a seat. Hopefully, I'll have some meaningful things to say. You know, the expectations are high. Let me just tell you something about the video that you just saw right now. This was actually Don Rodman. And I can tell you that Don, right now, I just talked to him actually 2 days before I came here.
Your mic so you could walk around.
Oh, thank you. So, thank you. So I guess I can walk around. Can you guys hear me back there? Okay? All right. So I can tell you one thing. So, yes. Maybe not working. Maybe it is working. Thank you.
What was that?
Get a little bit nervous about this technology. So Don is a lovely young man, 43, my age. He battled the first time in 2008 when we did the brain surgery, and you saw how we took the tumor out of that part of the brain that controls movement, all right? And it was on the left side. And I don't know if you noticed that at the moment that he's going into the car, the right arm was loose. He couldn't move it. He couldn't coordinate it. He was able to recover. He ran a marathon, the Baltimore Marathon, the same marathon that I'm going to be running actually on Saturday, a week from today, with a grade 3 tear. Don't applaud yet. I may not make it through this thing. But nonetheless, he ran that marathon. And this year, unfortunately, his tumor came back. Brain cancer. He came back with a vengeance. And he is now, unfortunately, in hospice care, unable to move, completely paralyzed, and unable to talk. Yet he was willing for me to be able to share his story with you, because those are the real heroes in my life. You guys are the heroes. My patients and their family are the people that matter the most to me, and the reason why I do what I do. And I thank you for that. So I'll tell you a little bit about this issue of being blessed. I am blessed in many ways. I take care of patients with brain cancer. You know, cancer affects hundreds of thousands of people in the United States. I am sure that every single person right here in this room has been touched by someone or knows someone who's battling some sort of cancer. Brain cancer affects about 40,000 people a year. 40,000 people. That is the most devastating brain cancer that we know. The same brain cancer that is affecting the life of Don, and the same brain cancer that took the life of Senator Kennedy. All right? This is a devastating disease. And I do about 300 brain surgeries a year. And every one of my patients is part of history. That is, we send part of their tissue to our laboratory, and we study the way these cells move. You know, when I was a little kid, I wanted to be an astronaut. And I remember growing out there in Palaco, all right? And it was a small little town, and I remember it was really hot, and we used to go to the roof of the house, and I looked at the stars, and I wondered one day, when am I going to be able to navigate the universe? And that's what I do today. I hold the universe between my hands. Imagine that. The universe of the brain. I get to explore cells in my laboratory, and you saw my students. Since then, the lab is twice. We get to explore these cells migrating through this incredible universe, which is the brain. The opportunities for that little boy who grew up in Mexico, for that teenager who came to the United States in the late 80s, were not always clear. I'm not going to lie to you. And I see a lot of young minds right here, and a lot of parents and probably grandparents who are proud of their children. And I'm proud of you. You are the future of this country. You know that by the year 2050, 1 out of 4 people, listen to this, 1 out of 4 people will be of Hispanic origin. 1 out of 4. How do we expect to keep this wonderful country? How do we expect to keep this economy the way it is if we don't get an education? When I went to medical school at Harvard, I was told by one of my dear mentors that education is the best provision for old age. I tell you. Also, my grandfather told me that a fool with a good tool is still a fool. It's not the education that you get. It's what you do with that education. It is our responsibility to change the course of this country. I'm not a politician. I'm certainly not an expert in economics. But 2 weeks ago, I was in Washington, D.C. with Mayor Bloomberg. You know, Mayor Bloomberg is actually the 13th wealthiest man in the world, all right? And he's talking to me. I'm just a poor kid. I'm here, you know, about 20 plus years ago. I do brain surgery and I do science, but I'm not even, you know, in any percentile for wealth. Non-material wealth. I have other kinds of wealth, and that is the wealth that my patients give me every day. That gift that they give me, the ability to take care of. Mayor Bloomberg asking me, what do I think? How can we change the economy? He's asking me for an opinion, and I don't have a good answer. But it was actually a rhetorical question. He knew the answer. He said, we need to educate our future generations. If we take care of our young today, our young are going to take care of the future. It is our responsibility. We can't sustain this economy without that effort. My education actually began here in Delta College. As you know, before my formal education began here at Delta College. Before that, my education began in the fields of the San Joaquin Valley in Fresno, California, right around Mendota. Anybody from Mendota around here? I see a hand out there. So I grew up in I came to the cantaloupe center of the world. I love cantaloupes. You know, I just love the smell of cantaloupes. I mean, it just takes me back. It stimulates a part of the brain that is called the limbic system, alrighty? And it brings you back those memories. The other thing that I love is the smell of tomatoes. Because I picked tomatoes for so long. And I love that smell. I tell you, I was proud. I was telling the students, I met some of the students in the back, I was proud of every single thing that I did. When I was picking tomatoes, I want to be the best tomato picker in the world. Alrighty? I was proud. I wanted to do my best. When I was picking cotton, I wanted to be the best cotton picker ever in the world. Now, as a brain surgeon, I want to be the best brain surgeon I can possibly be. And that is something that we have forgotten. We got used to over the last 20 years. We think that the American dream is easy. Some people think the American dream doesn't exist anymore. I'm telling you, the American dream is still alive and thriving. And I'm not running for office or anything like that, but it is true. It is alive and it is thriving. But I can tell you that the way this country was built, if you look back at our generations, it was built on people like us, immigrants, people who came to this country to work hard. Those two words, hard work. There is a price that one has to pay to succeed, and that is what I call the price of triumph. Most people think that you should get an education for free. I'm here to tell you that you are wrong. I'm still paying. By the time I finished medical school and residency, I had over $200,000 on debt. And I am a proud taxpayer, and I've been paying that debt over the last few years. Nothing is for free in life. And I tell my kids that all the time. That is a lesson that was passed on to me all the way from my grandparents, my parents, and a lot of my family members that I see here in the audience. Nothing is for free in this country. I'm going to share with you a passage of my introduction to education from my recent book. I got to tell you, I love this book, not because I wrote it myself. Mim Eichler, who is a very, very well-known writer. She wrote The Pursuit of Happiness. She came and spent time with me. And now when people have read my book and they talk to me, they say, you know, you sound like your book. I said, I should hope so, because I wrote it, number one. Number two is because I wanted to make sure that meme helped me to find my voice. This book was a catharsis for me. I had to deal with a lot of things. I had a lot of baggage, as you can tell. A lot of insecurities. By the time, even though I went to Harvard Medical School, I did my residency at the University of California, San Francisco, I remember the very first day I walked into Johns Hopkins. You know that Johns Hopkins has been the #1 hospital for 21 years in a row? 21 years in a row. Alrighty? The Department of Neurosurgery, where I work, alrighty, has also been the #1 department for that long. Neurosurgery, brain surgery in the world began at Johns Hopkins. So when I first walked in through these hallways and I saw the pictures and I saw the folders and I saw all these things, I was completely intimidated. I was. That was a way for me to stay humble. I tell my kids always tease me because I use that TV commercial. You know, the most mysterious man in the world, when he says, stay thirsty, my friends. I'm always thirsty and I'm always humble. I try to remain humble so one day I can try to make a difference. So in the late 80s, when I first moved here to Stockton, California, and I started working in the railroad in a company actually here, and you can read a lot of the details of my family and their loved ones, my family members actually, who risked their life to save my own life. But I can tell you something about this in regards to my education. I'm going to read you a passage. Nothing could diminish the education I had acquired in the fields. The experience had been a blessing, and I had learned from the best. The everyday heroes could till the soil and bring forth the harvest. As a year-round worker, I had known the thrill of picking a tomato from a vine that I had planted. But at 20 years old, I couldn't accept that I reached the pinnacle of where a field worker could go. With an education, I imagined myself landing a management job at one of the big food companies. Why not? Then, after making some real money, by the way, they didn't give me a job. I applied for some of those jobs, so they didn't give me one. Then, after making some real money, I would return to Mexico with the options to be and do whatever I chose. And the first step towards realizing this beautiful dream was to learn more English. Initially, Oscar, one of my cousins, didn't say a word, but then he started to laugh, as though laughter was the only reasonable response to my apparent absurdity. Don't kid yourself, he told me. He finally said, school to learn English? Remind you, this is 1987, 1988. Come on. At first, I didn't react and managed to let his comments roll off my back. Oscar had been through his own rough times, dealing with the divorce of his parents at a young age, but it occurred to me in this instance that he didn't really know what it was like to live in poverty or to go without access to the opportunities and education that living in the United States afforded, including the freedom to believe in and go after the American dream. So I shrugged off his laughter and said nothing. Oscar then became serious. Look, he said, you don't need the dictionary or night classes. Why waste your time? In a year and a half, you have accomplished what it took Sean, one of my coworkers, 11 years to do. You are at the top of the food chain already. Still not saying a word, I felt a prickle of anxiety start in my stomach and journey through me. Oscar continued, this is where you are supposed to be, Alfredo. You are going to be the foreman before too long. My heart banging like a bass drum in my ears. I couldn't catch my breath. I got it, of course, I got it. He wanted me to pull my head out of the clouds, to protect me from filling myself with big ideas and setting myself up for disappointment. But in so doing, he was killing the dreams of that little boy who had stood on his roof with a slingshot trying to hit a star. Many times, people will tell you, you can't do it. And I'm here to tell you that can't should not be in your vocabulary. You can do anything you want. If your heart can feel it and your brain can conceive it, if you can dream of it, I promise you, you can do it. There's no question. Now, it's not going to come easy. You are going to have to work really, really hard. Alrighty? As I said before, that is the price of triumph, the American dream. By the time I came here to Delta College, I have a wonderful group of friends and some of the most influential teachers that I have ever had. And I know I was telling my colleagues in the back that Dr. Ortiz, who's a history teacher here, I tell you, Dr. Ortiz was unbelievable. You know what I love about Dr. Ortiz? Is that he loves what he does. He has passion for what he does. All right? I took that lesson all the way from here, from the classroom, to what I do today. Imagine what I do today. I get to see the human brain pulsating, dancing with such a rhythm. The brain is dancing with the heart. The very same organ, the universe, I get to hold it in my hands every single day. And I have passion for that. I love what I do. I am given a gift every single day I operate on my patients. And that is the gift of having an opportunity to play a role in someone's life. If I tell you that all my patients buy brain surgery, I'd be lying. Sometimes, about 2 weeks ago, I had the father of one of my nurses who was found down. We didn't know for how long. Alrighty, so I am in the room doing brain surgery, and I get a phone call. My resident is with me. We're doing complex brain tumor. It's about 5 or 6 p.m. and it's on a Friday, and I'm supposed to have my laboratory meeting. You saw the laboratory meeting. By the way, we finish at 10 p.m. That's early. Most of the time, we finish at midnight. So I am ready to getting ready to go to my lab, and I'm thinking, I'm going to start lab meeting at 7 p.m. We're going to be done by 10, and I'm going to get home, and maybe the kids are still up, so I can say hi to them. 7 p.m., a nurse calls in from the emergency room and said, we have a 55-year-old man. He's the father of one of our nurses. He was found down. He has no exam. His pupils are dilated. He's got a very large blood clot in the brain. I said, well, he's 55. What happened? I'm hearing all this on the speakerphone, and I'm talking to my resident, and I'm trying to multitask. That's one thing that you guys should use, multitasking in whatever you do in life. So I am finishing the case. We're closing the door. We're closing the brain. Everything is looking good. I said, well, you're going to have to bring the patient up to the operating room. We're going to have to perform a hemicraniotomy. That means taking half of the bone off of this patient's head to see if we can save his life. He had a very large. So we wheel him to the operating room. The anesthesiologist is there. The nurses are about 20 people. And they're all panicking. You know, the guy is dying, is actively dying in the operating room. The daughter is there, is a nurse in our service. So I go into the operating room, immediately open the skin, take the bone flap off. At the moment that I do this, the patient dies, literally, on the table. It's something that the patient was really, literally already down. And at the moment that you relieve the pressure, the brain decompresses and it loses all the ability to regulate itself. So it's a very well-known phenomenon. So you can imagine the agony that I felt because this was the father of one of my team members who were trying to save life. The truth is, no matter what we do, we're only human. We can't change sometimes the course of nature. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't try. And I tried that day to fight with all my might and all my power for that patient and for that family so I could help him. But unfortunately, I was unable to save his life, and he ended up. Once again, he was already on his way out. As you can imagine, he was actively herniating. So I went on, I spoke to the family, and you can imagine the family was so thankful. It turns out that the patient last time he had been seen was 24 hours prior. So he had been already down for about 24 hours. So once again, nature had actually already taken the best of this patient's life. In my own experience, on April 14th, 1989, there was a decisive moment. You know, one of those moments that sometimes you face where you have to go one way or the other, and you have to make a decision. Some of us have those moments when we're kids. Some of us have them when we are teenagers. Some of us have them when we are adults. And some of us have them when we're in our 60s or 70s. It's okay. At any point, you will have to make and you will have to face that fork. For me, it was April 14th, 1989. All right? And I wrote about this in this book with Mim. And I tell the story. And I told the story to celebrate the life of those who saved my life. You can imagine the amount of work and coordination that it took an incredible crew to save my life. They were like the special forces. They all could have been famous brain surgeons. They all could have been famous astronauts. They all could have been famous teachers. They all could have done anything they wanted to. A lot of them, they never had the opportunity as I did, and I took advantage of my education. But in this decisive moment, I had a choice. And I'm going to read you a passage actually from the book that sets the stage as to what happened that day. April 14th, near the port of Stockton, California. A bright white light, circular in shape, looms high above me at the top of what appears to be a tall, dark tunnel. My mind races, trying to backtrack and remember how I came to be lying at the bottom of this railway tanker, gasping for what oxygen I could get, fighting to stay conscious, staring at the light high above me. Facts present themselves first. I know that I'm 21 years old, the firstborn of Sostenes and Flavia Quinones. I know 10 minutes earlier, on an otherwise typical Friday morning at the remote industrial site where I am employed by California Railcar Repair as a welder, painter, and driver, I was at the top of this tunnel looking down. It was on a Friday. I had my lab meetings on a Friday. The accident, there are no accidents. I do things for a reason. Most people ask me, why is the cover like this and there's stuff in the background? There is a reason why every single one of those pictures is there. The accident happened without warning. As I went about my business of supervising the removal of a heavy round lids from the huge pressurized tankers. With my number 2 man, Pablo, I headed up the crew possibly not only for removing the lids, but then operating the equipment needed to get them into the hangar area for restoration and repair. This was heavy-duty stuff, all right? Earlier on these days, like any other day, just before our lunch break, I had approached one of the railway cars with Pablo following behind me and climbed speedily up the exterior ladder to the top of the tanker. Despite the weight of my Red Wing steel-toe boots, I love the Red Wings. Those are like the steel-toe boots. You know, one day I'm going to get a pair, another pair. And the tools in the pocket of my coveralls, I strode briskly along the narrow walkway to the midpoint where the pressurized lid was bolted tightly to the massive tank, which had last carried 35,000 gallons of liquefied petroleum gas. Though the tank was empty, we knew from removing hundreds of these lids to expect residual fumes once we undid the safety valves. Since we wear no protective mask, we were also accustomed to the smell reminiscent of a gas leak from a stove. I go through this saga, and unfortunately, I ended up at the bottom of this, and I am telling the story as I'm looking up. And I had no control over my life. That reminds me of what my patients do with me. You know, I go into the operating room and I actually have a pact with my patients. The pact is that they trust me with their lives and that I will do everything within my power to get him in and out of the operating room safe, like the special forces. And I take that very seriously. With great power comes great responsibility. I didn't say that. That was the movie Spider-Man. Remember that? But I love the quote. I move fast forward. April 14, 1989, my promising future came crashing down after my plunge to the bottom of the railway tank and my unsuccessful attempt to climb out. As I lay unconscious without oxygen, face down dying. Of course, I recall that moment, not from my direct experience of it, but from reports given to me by years later by those who were there. Accounts that were as difficult for them to give me as they were for me to hear. For my father, all of his worst nightmares were realized the instant he saw Pablo's face and understood that my co-worker had let go of my hand. After he heard the thud reverberating in the tank, Papa's screams were momentarily silenced as he was joined by Ramon, my brother-in-law, and one side of him was Gus, one of my relatives, carrying ropes and collapsing ladder on the other side. They had arrived in time to hold my dad back as they looked down to see that I had fallen with my knees bent slightly under me, my body in a fetal position. I can only imagine my father's desperate frustration, knowing that he had been so close to being able to save my life. By all accounts, including his own, he went mad, and with the sound of Don Mateo praying loudly as he still knelt by the side of the tracks, my father lurched forward, attempting to enter the tank, thrashing and fighting the others as they sought to calm him. The more they tried to reason with him, explaining that he would die if he went in, the more my father fought off their efforts to restrain him. Gus reminded my father that he was too broad-shouldered to fit through the opening, not to mention too old to risk the rescue. Thinking back to what my dad must have felt at hearing these words, who wouldn't give their own life to save your son or your daughter's life? At the same time, I can imagine my father was the same age at that moment that I am today, and he had already his 21-year-old son at the bottom of this tanker dying. Gus wanted to come down, but he was also much too big to squeeze into the hole. So it was Ramon, my brother-in-law, who pushed himself to the front, insisting that he was going to go in and save my life. He did it not once, but twice. Imagine, this is a team that is working together with limited resources and is trying to get me out through a hole that is about this big, only about 14 or 16 inches in diameter, and I am completely out. They were able to get me out of there. I don't know how. I recollect in the book the story that I was told. It was a miracle, to be honest with you. When I woke up, I was in a stretcher. No different than the stretchers that I use as a brain surgeon now to stabilize my patients when they have massive brain trauma or neck or spine trauma. All right? And I have a doctor telling me to relax. He's saying, relax. And I'm thinking to myself, relax? I can't breathe and I'm about to vomit. You know, and he wants me to relax. So we went through the whole saga, CT scans, MRIs. Conclusion, he's okay. I think he's going to make it through this. I remember hearing the doctor telling my dad, and my father and my brother-in-law and my brother and all my co-workers are on the outside. So I remember my father knew I was going to be okay, because at one point I looked at him and I said, hey, Dad, I was so vain, all right? It was so vain. I have to admit it. I'm still very vain. And I asked my dad, how's my hair is looking right now? Is my hair looking okay? And my father said, he's going to be okay. Imagine that. I tell you, there's a fine line, and I mentioned the word vain because there's a fine line between confidence and arrogance. And I cross that line every single day. All right? I have to be honest. I cross that line every single day. You have to cross that line sometimes. That line between confidence and arrogance, I always tell my students, try not to cross it. But when you cross it, it's a mistake. just pull yourself back into the side of confidence instead of being on the other side where there is arrogance. I am humble every single day because I'm given an opportunity to go and explore the universe. Remember what I said about the universe? I explore the universe of the brain and I hold it in between my hands. But doesn't matter how good of physicians or surgeons we are, we can defeat nature. So I am humble every single day to see and to learn the journey from my patients and their families, the struggles they go through, sometimes to come and see me all the way to Hopkins. I have patients coming from California to see me at Hopkins because they think that I can find a cure for their disease. The truth is, I can't find a cure for brain cancer yet. We work hard in my laboratory to try to find a cure, but we are probably years away from finding meaningful ways to treating this disease. But the last thing that you can take from people is hope. Inside every single one of us, there is hope. And I am in the business, as a brain surgeon at Johns Hopkins, of giving my patients hope. You know that every one of my patients, before they walk into the operating room, they are part of history. They get consented. So their tissue, instead of ending on the garbage and the biological waste, it ends up in my laboratory. So they are part of history. And it gives me great pride that I can provide a little bit of hope that their lives, they all know that they have a death sentence, unfortunately, because of the brain cancer. But they know that their lives came and they're not going to be in vain. They are going to be able to make a difference in this world. And for that, I am very, very thankful. I will share with you, thank you. I will share with you a story in regards to humbling experiences, all right? This is an experience, it's in a chapter called Brainstorm, and it's a thrilling anecdote of my experience here at the University of California, San Francisco, when I was actually a neurosurgery resident. So the setting is the following. I finished medical school, I graduated from Harvard, top of my class, commencement speech, you name it, and I come down to UCSF, all the way, start from the bottom. And I am a third-year resident. And I had to accelerate because there were some people who didn't make it through residency and they had to be let go. So I had to accelerate to be the chief resident at the number one level one trauma in the Northern California area, right? This is level one, means really high complex stuff. And one day, we get a patient who that night, some sort of criminal had taken the eyes out of this young, beautiful woman. It was all over the news, okay? So I am taking care of her. She's up in the intensive care unit, the neurointensive care unit. And the next day, we hear on the actual radio and on television that there is a high-speed chase, like out of a movie, in the middle of San Francisco. And they saw this criminal, and they were chasing him in the middle of San Francisco. So the world works in mysterious ways. They were able to chase this individual in the middle of San Francisco, and unfortunately, 2 police cars collide. 2 cops died on the scene, and other 2 cops were brought into the emergency room at the San Francisco General Hospital. And that's the setup, all right? Here we go. We got officers down, we got officers down. The words crackled through the static in the emergency room police radio late on Wednesday, June 12, 2002. At one time, I have felt like I was caught up in an action movie or TV drama. But in fact, these dramatic words were real and marked the beginning of my 4th year of residency at the University of California, San Francisco. Now, as the chief resident at the trauma center, long gone was the night when I nearly passed out at the side of a trauma victim with a light shining through the hole in his head. By now, I was well trained in my work with neurotrauma that earlier in the day I had persuaded Dr. Manley, who's my dear friend, he's an attending in San Francisco, I persuaded him to go home for some rest after the non-stop incoming cases we had been seeing all week. We had both endured 3 days largely without sleep, okay? Grabbing only a couple of hours of shut-eye in closet-sized hospital offices. As the attending surgeon, Jeff wanted to know why he should go home for a break if I was the second in command, the chief resident was going to stay. Wasn't I as tired as he was? And I used to tease Jeff all the time, and I say, no way, my hombre. You know me, I'm just warming up. Besides, I am younger than you, I teased my slightly older colleague. They thought that we were brothers, actually. We looked alike, but he's from Kentucky, all right? We always said that we must have the same father, because we really did look alike. They thought that we must have been brothers in a different life. With another attending surgeon en route to take over for Dr. Manley, I took charge and marshaled our forces, making sure that every able body was standing by a battle stations, ready for not one, but 4 officers to be transported in. In our professional calling, to treat the sick and wounded, many of whom were brought us by police officers, there was an unwritten code that at any time we treated people in law enforcement and we were unable to save them, they would die in our arms. They were our brothers and sisters. Many of them knew me by name, or should I say, as Dr. Q. And I knew many of them personally as well. All of us working in the hospital saw them as heroes, putting themselves in the line of fire, dealing with a kind of reality on the street that we knew little about. They, in turn, saw us as soldiers on a front line of another sort. On this night, our 2 worlds were about to intersect in profound and powerful ways. For those of us on duty in the trauma ward, a rush of crime-related and traumatic injuries had begun early on Monday and then moved up to rapid speed by the time we heard the police radio came to life again on Wednesday night. This week stood in stark contrast to the previous one, which had been relatively quiet, like an eerie calm before the storm. The weather for the first week in June had seemed more like that in Mexicali, already 120 degrees, hot and dry. Overall, still, then like typical San Francisco weather, something was up, lurking around the corners. Indeed, everything had cranked up on Monday and 10th, and then exploded by Tuesday, the 11th. That morning, the first case that Dr. Manley and I saw in surgery was an assault victim whose head had been bashed in, causing a massive amount of bleeding in the right side of the brain. His situation was dire, but we emerged optimistically in time to get to the day's second case. A scheduled replacement of a bone flap removed months earlier from the skull of a patient who had been in a car accident and whose brain had swollen up like a mushroom as if trying to escape out of the skull. In his 3rd surgery for this patient, we could see that removing the bone flap had been effective, allowing the brain to swell and ultimately to recede. We replaced the bone flap, moving expeditiously, encouraged by the signs. So far, so good. Jeff goes home. That night, we get 4 brain traumas, in addition to this young cop. This young cop made the news, Nick Ferrando. He was all over the news in San Francisco. Alrighty? So, when the 2 cops came in, 2 of them were dead on the scene. The other 2 made it into the hospital. One was in relatively good condition. The other one, Nick Ferrando, was in really bad shape. He had no exam, similar to the patient that I told you, the father of my nurse. All right, and I remember walking into the emergency room, and at this point I have my team, and I'm the chief resident. And you know, just like in the movies, things rush, they move fast. But like when I am in the emergency room, everything seems to slow down. Everybody's rushing, but it's like I have control of the whole situation. I know everything what is going on. I have my team, 2 interns, 2 trauma residents, and I have this young man, Nick Ferrando, through a big window. I have him on a CT scanner. And behind me is about 20 people from the police department, including the father of this young man, who at the time Nick was about 22 or 23, who was a very famous commander, and the chief of the police department. And they're waiting to hear what decision I'm going to make about this young man. Am I going to take him, yes or no, to the operating room? He has no exam, remind you. All right? And then Miraculously, I see him just flicker his finger. As I am paying attention through the window, and his whole body is taped like this, and he's got trauma everywhere. When the two cars collided, he went through the front windshield and ended up crashing against the wall. All right? So I said, he's going in. We're taking him in. So that night, I performed 2 brain surgeries on this young man. I left him with a small mohawk of bone right here in the middle. Literally, everything else, his brain swelled. And I can't take credit for what happened next, because what happened next was that my whole team in the neurotrauma suite up in the neurointensive care unit worked with him for the next 2 months to save his life. So the brain surgery was the easy part. What I did was just what I do with my hands. I knew exactly. I went through the motions. I knew that I needed to move fast. I knew that I needed to give him blood. I knew that I needed to decompress the brain, otherwise he was going to die instantly. So there are things. And I know how to mobilize everybody. All right? I got people working, the nurses, the anesthesiologists. I got people bringing blood. I got the people bringing the equipment. Even before they put the tube, I'm already cutting the skin, and I'm doing all kinds of stuff to these patients, because that's what I do. I'm like the special forces of brain surgery, and I'm there to save this patient's life. So we did. But the next 2 months, what this neurotrauma did was to save the life of this young man. And miraculously, one day, as I am rounding in the neurointensive care unit, I say, Nick, how you doing, bud? 2 months. No response. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm not quite sure Nick is going to do it. Although there were some signs that there was something going through his brain. Every now and then his eyes would open a little bit. He would localize what is called, when you rub their chest, they move up their hands. There are small little signs that you look for, signs of life. And he was 23. He was fit, as you can imagine. And one day I said, Nick, how you doing, bud? And he opened his eyes. And I remember, I jumped back. I said, holy guacamole. It was a miracle to me to see life coming back. You can only imagine. The amount of pride that I had for my team to get him through this. Once again, what I did as a surgeon, I think I look back, it was the easy part. What they did to save his life was unbelievable. So to make the long story short, he ended up going, and it's all recounted in my book, he went back 2 years later to work as a police. We ended up putting his bones back and reconstructed him, and it was unbelievable. So then I get a plaque from the police department. All right? And the plaque was something with a quote from Vince Lombardi. And he said the following: the quality of a person's life is in direct proportion to their commitment to excellence, regardless of their chosen field of endeavor. Vince Lombardi, famous football. All right, it's a beautiful, let me repeat that. The quality of a person's life is in direct proportion to their commitment to excellence, regardless of their chosen field of endeavor. What did I tell you earlier? Doesn't matter what you do. Do it with passion. My grandfather used to tell me, if you want to be a carpenter, be the best carpenter you can possibly be. And one day, you will be personally carving the desks on which major famous documents are being signed. If you want to be, I tell my son, if you want to be a bodyguard, be the best bodyguard you can possibly be, because he is into the martial arts, all right? Because I said, one day, someone is going to recognize your talents, and they're going to have you, guard the life of very important people. So no matter what you do, whatever your field is, give it always your best. So I got that plaque, and then I got this small little card. And it was in the back, it said, any courtesies you can extend to Dr. Q would be highly appreciated. Alex Fagan, the chief of the police department. It was a get out of jail card. I used it a couple of times in San Francisco. I've been trying to get another one in Baltimore, but it hasn't worked yet. So, talking about being humble, let me share one more powerful story with you, alrighty? About one of my patients, my real heroes. My heroes are my family, my children, my parents, my patients, my students, the future generations, all right? Every single person that I meet, I wish I can spend a day with you and get to tell you a lot of these stories. I can't. The truth is, I can't mentor everybody who comes my way, and that's how I send them. Sometimes I get emails. Every day I get hundreds of emails for my own work as a brain surgeon, as you can imagine. Then another several hundreds, and somehow I am able to get through. Somehow, I get through all this stuff. So I tell you, one of my patients, Sharon is her name. And this is on page 286. Let me see if I can find it, because this is such a powerful story that I wanted to share with you. I will never forget walking into an exam room with devastating news for my patient Sharon, a young mother in her early 20s who had traveled to Baltimore from out of state, in this case it was from North Carolina, with her husband, a soldier, who just returned from an overseas tour of duty. When the couple arrived at the clinic, we first talked about their 2 children, a toddler and a baby, and the joys and challenges of parenting. Sharon was bright-eyed, thoughtful, and stoic when I described the surgery and the follow-up treatment for what I suspected was a high-grade malignant tumor in the brain stem. All right, the brain stem is a part of the brain that controls your heart, your breathing, all the vital structures. So those are what is called inoperable tumors. So sometimes we can only do a biopsy with a small little needle. This is how dangerous these cases are. We were able to reach her primary care doctor back home, put him on the speakerphone, and coordinate a plan of action when she returned. Everything went perfectly in the operating room from a technical standpoint, but when I removed the tumor and sent it for an intraoperative test, it looked as dangerous as I had anticipated. A senior pathologist came to the operating room to confirm that the initial flash freeze read showed that it was a high-grade malignant cancer. The final biopsy turned revealed to be one of the faster-growing, higher-grade glioblastoma multiforme tumors, the same that Senator Kennedy, but this time it was in the brain stem. All right? In my post-op meeting with Sharon and her husband, I first commented on her courage. And by the way, I said, as you sit here today, you look great. What's your secret? With a nervous smile, she said, brain surgery. I then had to tell them that my worst fears had been confirmed about the nature of the tumor and describe the best and worst case scenarios for life expectancy. Best scenario, 6 months. Worst scenario, 2 months. Of course, she was 26, remember? 2 little kids. Of course, we had treatment options and would be vigilant in applying them. Sometimes in such meetings with patients, I explain that numbers mean little and that it is not helpful to put a finite limit on time left. But Sharon and her husband insisted on knowing the general expectations so that they could actually plan for their children. I told them that we would try to buy more time and stave off an immediate progression. Another year would be a blessing, but we would try for 2 more years. At that moment, they realized with sudden certainty that she was really going to die. And listen to the interaction that took place between these 2 young couples. Imagine how powerful it is for me to be in the middle of this and what I learned and what I take home from this. Sharon did something that I will remember for the rest of my life. She turned to her husband, put her hand on his knee, and as both of them gave into tears, she looked into his eyes, saying softly but powerfully, I love you. With those 3 words, she did everything, that she knew he would be left with 2 little children to raise without their mother, that he would live the rest of his life without his soul mate and partner. She was not thinking of herself at that moment, only of her loved ones. I almost get tears every time I tell this story. And like that, I witness those stories every day in my profession as a brain cancer surgeon. And I want to find a cure. I am tired that for the past 100 years, people have said, you can't find a cure. When I decided that I wanted to be a brain cancer surgeon, my colleagues at UCSF said, why? You could become a spine surgeon, you can become a vascular surgeon, have a much better life, and probably get to see your family. I am tired of people telling someone like me that It can't be done. Remember what I told you? Can't should not be on your vocabulary. It's certainly not in mine. And when people tell me I can't, it's when I want to do it even more. But I have to remain humble. And I'm going to wrap up with one more story from this book. The lessons that we learn. And this one is on page 309. This is a story. It's at the end of my book. It's what I love about what I do and the lessons I learn. And you can never underestimate the people around you. For all those young people here, look at your parents. Look at your older siblings, look at your grandparents, they're going to teach you lessons. For those parents, look at your little ones, they're going to teach you lessons. Alrighty, this one is with my son, 4 years old. 2006, we left California in 2005. I left California as to go and join the faculty as an assistant professor at the Johns Hopkins University. Alright, #1 hospital, #1 neurosurgical department, and I was completely intimidated. Within 6 years, I had become the fastest and most accelerated faculty member in neurosurgery to go from being an assistant professor to being nominated to full professorship. It takes on average about 12 to 14 years at Johns Hopkins in the neurosurgery department. And I can assure you that those accomplishments, I'm not the only one who deserves them, but the people around me, in this case my family, my wife and my children, my parents, my siblings, they are the ones who have sacrificed the most because I have spent most of my time at Hopkins in the hospital. I can assure you, they have not accelerated my promotion because I am Mexican or because I have an accent. Now, not because I have an accent does that mean that I think with an accent. So that is what I call the price of triumph. It was not until 2009 that my wife, Anna, came to me and she said, you need to stop going and working on the weekends. And she had to put a stop because she said, you're going to lose your family if you keep doing this. And I had to make a change in my life. And now, remember what I said, that sometimes you face that fork in life and you have to make decisions. I make that decision. Now I still work in the weekends, but I work from home and somehow we're able to coordinate it. All right? But there's a price to be able to triumph and to be able to succeed, and it's called hard work. You know, some people think that it's actually chance. Santiago Ramon y Cajal once said, chance and good luck does not come to those who want it. It comes to those who look for it. And you have to look for that chance every single day. I can assure you that if you work hard, if you concentrate, if you focus on your dreams, the sky is the limit. No matter at what stage in your life you are. When I was in medical school, one of my classmates was 49 when she started medical school. She finished when she was 54. Alrighty? Unbelievable. Talking about inspiration. So for some of you guys who are in your 60s or 70s, it's not too late. You know, your life expectancy is in your mid-80s. You still have a few, 15 years to make a difference if you want to go back to school. And for the young ones, I believe you have tons of time and dreams to fulfill. So let me tell you about this experience with my son, David. Alrighty? We moved to Baltimore in a beautiful day like today, September. Right now, the weather in Baltimore is about 55 degrees. So it's sunny in the morning and it's a little bit chilly. You know, here it's a little bit warmer. But we get up in the morning and we go out on a Sunday, and I'm walking with my son. You know, and I love this interaction. I say the following. One of my favorite exchanges with David came when he was only 4 years old. Shortly after we arrived in Baltimore, that day, he and I woke up early on a beautiful Sunday morning and went for a walk to a nearby park. Looking at him proudly, I said, David, You are the man. And here he is, he's riding his little tricycle, he's 4. And he pauses, and I pause, and he looks up to me, and he says the following, as I wrote right here. He goes to me, Dad, I'm not the man. He goes to me, no, Dad, I'm not the man. I pondered this statement for a few seconds, and then thinking that I was going to tell him and teach him something he didn't know, I said, son, I just want you to believe in yourself. He tries to go a little bit more, pauses, looks up to me, and he says, Dad, I do believe in myself, but I just know I'm not the man. At age 4, he was teaching me a lesson about humility and self-awareness. He knew, he believed in himself, but he knew he wasn't the man. But thinking that I had something to teach him, how arrogant of me to think that I had something to teach my son. Sometimes when you try to make, and my kids, they make fun of me once again. It's amazing because at work, I command a certain level of authority, all right? There was an article published about 3 weeks ago in Nature. They came in. Nature is like arguably the biggest journal for science, that in science. And they came and featured my laboratory. And they tell an anecdote of me walking into the kitchen. In the laboratory, I have a beautiful laboratory. And as I'm walking, there's a group of about 10 people laughing, and they're all my laboratory members. And as soon as I walk in, they all looked at me, and there's dead silence. All right? Now, I don't take pride on that. I'm just a regular guy. I always tell people, I'm just a regular guy. I wrote my book to illustrate the fact that a regular guy like me can actually take advantage of the American dream and make something out of his or her life. All right? But they are all silent. And people make, and I remember thinking to myself, I went home that night and I asked my wife, I said, do you think I intimidate people? And she says, are you kidding me? It's like, have you seen him coming home with you? Because I have dinners at home, and I'm a regular guy, all right? I am a regular guy. I don't want to intimidate people, but they said, are you kidding me? These kids look at you, and they're tripping on each other. They don't even know what to do. And I said, well, that's not my intention. I said, well, that is the kind of power as we move forward in life. So once again, that's the kind of authority I have at work. And at home, I ask my kids to do something, and they look at Mom. And I said, Mom, is that okay? I'm going to leave you with 3 messages. The world is a dangerous place, not because of people who do evil, but because of those who look and do absolutely nothing. Albert Einstein said that. Most people think that it is intelligence what makes a good scientist, that it is intelligence what makes a good brain surgeon, that it is intelligence that what makes a good teacher. I'm here to tell you that that is not right. It is character. Build character. Winston Churchill said once, success is going from failure to failure without the loss of enthusiasm. I fail every single day, and I never lose enthusiasm. And I keep moving forward, and I ask you to do exactly the same thing. And one of my most favorite movies, Rocky, the last Rocky, not the first Rocky, my 2 favorite movies, the first Rocky and the last Rocky. There's a scene when Rocky tells his son, nothing hits harder than life. Life is going to get you down on your knees. And it's not about how hard you can hit, but about how hard you can be hit. And you still get up and you keep moving forward. And I'm telling you, you will face those challenges in life. But no matter how hard life hits you, get up and try again. So what would I like to ask you to do? 4 A's. If you take anything from the nonsense that I said today, it's 4 A's to be successful in life. All righty? Availability, ability, affability, and accountability. Let me repeat. Availability, affability, ability, and accountability. Have a wonderful night, everybody. Thank you very much.
You want to take any questions? Or should
Oh, yeah. How are we doing with that time? Are we good?
we can take a few questions.
All right. Is that to you?
If you want to take a few questions from the audience, anybody have any questions?
They're ready to go home.
We have microphones on both sides, so if you have any questions.
Yo le quiero preguntar si el libro está en español o si...
El libro está en... ¿Dónde está la persona preguntándome? No la miro. ¿En dónde? La pregunta es que si el libro está en español.
Sí.
Todavía no sale en español. The question is whether or not the book is in Spanish. Unfortunately, the book is not in Spanish yet. Todavía el libro no está en español, pero el año entrante la Universidad de California lo va a publicar en español.
Gracias.
Gracias.
Thank you.
There was another question somewhere around here. Yes.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Q, very
My
much.
pleasure, my pleasure.
I wonder what you think of the proton therapy that's used for cancer surgery in the brain.
Yes, obviously we use it all the time. One of the advantages of proton therapy is that it's wonderful for the treatment. The disadvantages is that there's only 5 centers in the United States that have it available. One of them being here in Santa Clara, obviously, so we're blessed that we have at least one proton beam center. It's extremely expensive. I think it does work well, but unfortunately it's not the cure for any type of cancer. But I think that with limited resources, we have to find better ways to give radiation to our patients. That was a technical question. I'm comfortable with those too. There was a question right here.
Now, when you first came, you found yourself alone, right? How
Yes.
much of an influence do you think your parents had, and how much of an influence do you think that the children who are blessed here to have parents, how much do you think of an influence they make?
Oh, there's no question. Actually, it was a similar question. They asked me, who are my role models? And as I look back in my life, it was a combination of my grandparents and my parents who provided that role models that I needed. And when I first came to the States, I remember, living in that small trailer home, and I remember crying myself to sleep. And I am sure that I went through periods of severe depression, and I remember my father and my mother giving me the strength. They believed in me. They never criticized me. They always believed in me. And I always encourage our parents to encourage their children. Thank you. All righty, guys.
One more question.
Hello?
Yes.
Hi, Dr. Q.
Yes.
I just had a question. Like, I had
This is like, oh yeah, I see.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to tell where you are.
Oh, it's fine. I had a lot of friends that I wanted to invite to this, and because of previous obligations, they were unable to make it. I just wanted to ask you, what is the best way to share your message of,
Thank you.
That you can do it?
It's very simple. I tell you. Tell me your name again. John, you said, or?
No, my name is Mark.
Mark, I tell you, Mark. I got into a point in my life where I cannot mentor every single student who emails me or sends letters, patients, and stuff like that. And that was one of the reasons, after many years of being at Hopkins, that I decided to write my book. Because a lot of people had written about me, but I wanted to finally write the way that I see the world and the way that people have had an influence. So I always tell people, the book tells my story, my secrets, and things that I never told people, whether they're controversial or not. And it's one way of me to try to pass on my message so you and your friends can realize that you also have power within you to one day tell your own story.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm trying to get everybody seated.
Thank you, guys.
Okay,